Okay, thanks everyone for joining, and we're going to get started. I'll pass over to our host today, Celine Gravlins. Appreciate you all joining. Just keep in mind you can type in questions that we will address at the Q&A portion of the discussion. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Martin. And hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be here. Welcome to today's webinar, Your Network is Wherever Your Data Travels, How to Secure Data Anywhere It Goes. My name is Celine Gravlins. I'm a cybersecurity analyst with Keyavi Data, and I'll be your host for today. Just a quick background on the company. Keyavi just formally launched in 2020 with a goal of eradicating data loss for organizations in any market. We're breaking new ground by making data itself intelligent and self-aware so that it can protect itself. Today, I'm joined by TJ Minicello. He's currently the VP of Cyber Intelligence here at Keyavi Data, and he comes from an extensive background in threat intelligence, having worked at large financials such as Citi, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, as well as in government and defense. Thanks for being here, TJ.
Glad to be here.
For today's agenda, we'll start with a discussion on traditional data protection, then the shift from data containment to intelligent data protection, followed by an overview of the data threat landscape, and finally some recommendations for enabling your business before moving on to the question and answer period. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, like we said, please ask them in the Q&A field here, and we'll address as many as possible at the end. So to get started, I'd like to start with a bit of an analogy. I'd like everyone listening in to picture something very valuable to you. Picture your most prized possession. This may be something like a game-worn jersey or a family keepsake. Either way, you know it's pretty safe in your house. You keep your doors locked, maybe you have a camera or a security system. And for many organizations, their most valued asset is their data, and it's decently safe within their home network. But let's say you want to share that item with someone across the country. You're going to need to ship it. So you get a box, maybe add some packing peanuts or tissue paper to keep it from breaking. Then you seal it up, go to the post office, maybe pay extra for tracking, and use registered mail. You've done everything pretty much that you can to keep it safe, but I'm sure it would still be weighing on you. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could constantly know the health of the item throughout its delivery and even beyond that? Because anything can happen between here and its destination. It could get lost, damaged, stolen, or sent to the wrong person. And this is the current state of data security today. Corporate networks are reasonably locked down, and they aim to prevent data from leaving. But the moment your data does legitimately need to leave, you lose all control of it. So this outlines what I want to talk about today: business enablement in this current environment of data security. Because we reluctantly live in a world of collaboration and trust. And sure, collaboration, that's essential for doing business, and that's not going to be changing. We need to be sharing data with customers and suppliers using the cloud and SaaS solutions. But we should not need to depend on trust to simply hope that our data is safe when we send it out of our network. So we're going to start by discussing the current state of things before moving on to our goal state, which is really an intelligent state. So that leads me to my first question for you, TJ. Can you tell me about the current methods and strategies that people are using for data protection, much like protecting a package?
Sure, Sloan. So the short answer is this. So we as a security community, we're trying really hard to protect the network systems and application that are designed to store, process, and transmit data. But I feel we're losing the battle against not only the bad guys, which I'll talk a little bit about in today's presentation, but more importantly, also those trusted insiders that are involved with accidental or unintentional data loss, and also trying to keep up with patching and deploying secure system configurations designed to protect data where it needs to travel, as you mentioned earlier. For the better part of my career, I've been part of building, managing, and securing networks with threat intelligence teams, security operations, built fusion centers, vulnerability management, and incident response functions. The sole mission of all of these teams that I've built and managed is to really understand the motive, capabilities, and intent of the bad guys and their most recent tactic the bad guys are using to compromise security, and then determining if the security controls designed to protect the network system, applications, and data from threats can in fact or can in fact detect and protect against the bad guys. And when they get in, because they always find a way in, assessing how bad it is, containing the exposure, and then getting back to normal business operations. This is really the current life of any security team. They're constantly assessing, determining, and trying to understand if our crown jewels are safe. The reason why we do this is not just for job security, but security itself should be a part of the business operation. And we want to securely enable the business to perform core functions and be successful. Basically, we want to win the battle.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so specifically then, what tools or methods are organizations doing to do that today?
Yeah, so on the next slide here, it represents some of the tools that security teams have at their disposal to really protect data, which is in the middle of this sphere. It's based on a defense-in-depth strategy. This typically includes physical security, policy and procedure, network-based controls like firewall, IDS, IPS, VPNs, data loss prevention, host-based security controls like antivirus, anti-malware, email gateway controls, web proxy controls, and the list goes on and on. It's clear that the industry, it's not short of security tools to use. But in almost, if not all, of the sensitive investigations that I've either led or been part of, the underlying question is not only how far into the corporate infrastructure a threat is embedded, but what data they had access to, and if any data was manipulated or stolen. This is the Houston, we have a problem scenario. When we find out that our data has been compromised. One of the reasons why I was drawn to Keyavi is because I want to focus on never having a Houston problem. I want to help professionals to be able to report to the board, because they will have to report to the board and communicate with senior leadership. I want to help them be able to confidently report how we know the company jewels are protected and secure wherever it travels within the organization, within its supply chain, or basically in the wild.
Interesting. So then where would you say that this current defense-in-depth model, this traditional data protection, fits into today's data ecosystem? And maybe how would you say that needs to evolve?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's asked a lot. And an important question to answer, to figure out. So in fact, we are forced to expedite the answer these days, given the increase of remote workers and organizations having to migrate to cloud services. Some organizations for the very first time, as we move into this new norm of operating business in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, Director Krebs from DHS's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, he shared specific concerns that organizations have to deploy Microsoft Office 365 and other cloud services. The concern was that organizations might have rushed to implement a remote work strategy, which is really our reality today, and not fully consider the security configurations of these platforms. So in my opinion, DHS and a lot of other security in government and organizations, they feel that because we are rushed to deploy this work from home telecommuting strategy, they're going to basically open themselves up to the bad guys, because some of these solutions, if they're not properly configured or security safeguards are enabled, the bad guy can exploit security. So I just feel that organizations must evolve their defense-in-depth strategy by better aligning to business objectives that might require data itself to freely travel anywhere, just to enable business.
Okay, and can you tell us a bit about these recommendations that you were referring to?
Yeah, well, this is where self-protecting data comes in. The strategy is that in order to securely enable business, and organizations needs to be able to allow different actions to protect data and account for different situations as they respond to market pressures to be competitive. So if we can enable different security policies and rule sets to the data itself, accounting for those situations and environments, then the business can enable their data to make the right security decision and be intelligent enough to know how to protect itself in every instance when it's traveling everywhere. A pretty powerful statement that data can always be protected and controlled.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And outlined here on this slide are the DHS Defense-in-Depth Recommendations. So it looks like here what they were focusing on from Director Krebs, as he had mentioned earlier, the use of multi-factor authentication was one that they were really focusing on, as well as developing a strategy to protect those very sensitive administration accounts. So the bad guys, like you were saying, are always trying to compromise, or accidental insiders accidentally misuse. From there, they recommend enabling logging to capture critical forensic data, as well as integrating logging into organizational SIM systems. And from there, they were talking about disabling unnecessary legacy protocols. So from that, did you have anything to specify about these recommendations, TJ?
Yeah, so all of these recommendations, they need to continue. It's basically simple. If any one of these controls are not followed, the risk of data compromise increases. But here's the deal. So DHS made these exact same recommendations back in May of 2019, and the security profession has been recommending these best practice for a lot longer than that. So the bottom line is that many organizations struggle to implement all of these controls or strategies, and basically try and struggle to enable the business today. So our data needs to be secure everywhere it travels, and these controls do not always protect data when it's traveling everywhere. So the reality is that many organizations not only struggle to implement defense in depth, they don't have the resources, tools, or procedures in place to be able to properly implement core security best practices like the deployment and management of a security event and incident management system, hiring dedicated staff to analyze forensics data for evidence that their network systems or data have been compromised, or their business model requires either delayed or not implementing a system patch in fear of losing revenue or providing a core business service, further exposing the organization to the bad guys or accidental insider. But even the best security programs, they haven't found a way to allow data to protect itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So can you elaborate on that protection strategy that organizations tend to be using today?
Sure. So on the next slide here, the diagram depicts a classical organizational infrastructure that most of us know today. It's pretty common. So most organizations have a good handle on locking down their company infrastructure, so as you mentioned before, for a classic data center. But the arrows in the diagram, they basically represent data that must flow in and out of the company infrastructure. And in many instances, once data travels outside the company infrastructure border and into the supply chain, like personal media storage, the cloud, anywhere basically, the company itself loses control to protect it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we all know data is flowing more than ever. Business does depend on that, like we've been saying. But so we can't focus data protection efforts on simply containment anymore with things like web storage, unmanaged devices, SaaS solutions, working with external partners and suppliers. I guess we can't really kid ourselves that the security mechanisms protecting the network are providing any reasonable control here once we go outside of the network.
Correct. So because we as security professionals, we should be in the business of enabling secure business. We can't contain where data is stored or travels. If we did that, we're not helping the business to be successful. So I just feel our new challenge is, how do we protect our data everywhere so we can enable business. As I mentioned, the yellow lines in this diagram, where your data needs to travel in order to facilitate business. So it needs to go everywhere.
Right. Okay, I get it. So data is going everywhere because the business is driving it. So we kind of need to change our way of thinking then on how to secure it, because your network is now expanded to pretty much just wherever your data goes. So it's not confined to how we would normally picture a network just in a box.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. But I would go, one step further in saying that in order to be competitive in today's business market, your business IT infrastructure is basically defined on where your data must travel. Security must flow with your data wherever it goes.
Okay, that makes sense. But then how do you actually do that? Because if we're saying defense in depth and traditional security are focusing on containing data within the network, how is it possible to, sure, yeah, let your data flow where it needs to go, but still maintain that protection outside of the traditional network?
Yeah, so let me just give you an example. Maybe it'll clear it up a bit. So let's say you want to set a policy to restrict a highly confidential or proprietary piece of data, and you only want to share it with a particular person, group, or organization in a specific part of the world during a defined time frame. And you want to be notified of any security events related to the data where that same piece of data finds itself trying to be accessed from an unmanaged device, or the wrong person, or in a restricted country, where the data itself, where the data itself made an intelligent security decision, and that decision was not to open if any of these dynamic security conditions are violated, and then reporting the violation back to the data owner forever, or until that data owner wants to recall the data or decommission it, even in a complex supply chain outside of the corporate infrastructure. This is self-protecting and intelligence data. The factors that allow it to be so intelligent is to enable data to know where it is geographically, what device it's on, and who's trying to access it. A system is not going to do this. The data itself is protecting itself. That's intelligent data.
Okay. And I've heard you mention before how this self-protecting data can be helpful for things like supply chain management. I think that's pretty cool. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. So consider all the times an organization not only has to, but needs to share data within its supply chain. The companies and organizations have to rely on trusting that their partners, suppliers, or other third parties have the right controls in place within their virtual infrastructure to protect your data. Organizations, they have to trust that, but they don't really know if their data is protected throughout your supply chain until the inevitable event where your supply chain is compromised. And then you're basically in damage control mode, trying to react to the data breach. So, with self-protecting data, you maintain control of your data, even when it's not under your control. You can even revoke access or decommission it, like I mentioned before, when you're basically finished using it. So, and this basically works through a number of levels within a typical supply chain.
Okay, interesting. So just if I'm sharing my sensitive data with someone for a project, but the project is done, I don't need to simply just trust that they've either deleted it or keeping it secure on their end. This way I can maintain control over the data and can say revoke access to it when we're done. So with that, just a reminder to all listeners, if you do have any questions, please remember to enter them in the Q&A field, and we'll be addressing as many as we can at the end. Just bringing it back to that opening analogy, I just want to take a minute to talk about that then, now that we've been talking about self-protecting technology. Because sure, your home is secure, like we've been talking about, but when you do inevitably need to share something outside of your home, you lose control of it. With modern mail, like we were saying, sure, you can get tracking updates about your package, but the updates are based on the status of the package itself, not necessarily the status of the contents inside. So you don't know when it's actually opened, what's done with the contents, or where it might go after that. But let's say you are able to do more. Rather than just a cardboard box that anyone can easily cut open, you're putting it in a safe. So anyone trying to open it at either endpoint or while it's in transit would need the proper code to access its contents. And this is akin to encrypting your data. But even beyond that, this safe is intelligent. So it can tell you where it is if someone's trying to open it and who that person is. And even if someone does have the proper code, maybe they've intercepted it, you can restrict their access based on their identity or to only open in certain locations or during a certain time period. And regardless of where it ends up, imagine you had the ability to revoke the package at any time. So whether it's still in transit or already arrived to its destination or somehow intercepted, you can revoke access to the package, even if the recipient has the code. So now, TJ, what you're saying is basically that imagine if your organizational crown jewels could do this, because at some point your critical data will need to leave your network. And if you're able to apply rules and restrictions as to where and when it can be opened and by whom, you're maintaining all of that control, even when it's outside of your possession.
Yeah, that's correct. And more importantly, if we don't do a better job of protecting data itself, the news is continue to be filled with headlines that, a company's been breached, there's been a large data breach. Companies, will still have to continue to pay large fines for not implementing proper security controls. Share prices will continue to drop due to negative brand or reputational damage because of your supply chain partners if they were breached, where you don't have necessarily control.
Interesting. So are there still risks of data breaches with this new paradigm?
Yes, there are. But with security enabled at the data level, those inherent risk of data being exposed to the wrong person, supplier, organization literally disappears or reduces significantly. So data breaches would essentially become irrelevant. Even if data fell into the wrong hands, that person would not be able to access it. You would still have control of your data. You would still protect your crown jewels. So in essence, the unknown unknowns that many organizations can't protect against, that were previous threats to the organization, these now become a known threat that you can protect against because you're enabling your data to make intelligent security decision wherever it travels. So if you don't know what the next tactic the bad guy will use to compromise your network, system, or application, because criminals are always evolving your crown jewels at trying to compromise your crown jewels. If data is your most valued asset, this unknown is irrelevant because no matter how much the bad guy's tactics evolve over time, you have armed your data forever to protect itself. No matter what tactics the bad guy uses today or in the future, you are now in front of the next threat.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk a bit about threats then. Can you tell me what threats organizations are typically dealing with when it comes to data protection today?
Yeah, so on the next slide here, there are various threat actors that specifically want to steal, hold hostage, misuse our data. They're looking to embarrass your company and the executives, or harm your brand or reputation in the market. These are very sophisticated, nation state cyber criminals, hacktivists, but they're also other internal threats to our data from malicious or accidental insiders, and even misconfigured or unpatched systems and other human error that is inevitable. So some research from the Ponemon Institute suggests that while over half of data breaches in 2019 were attributed to some malicious attack, almost a quarter was from accidents or human error, with another quarter resulting from some kind of system glitch. My point is, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a sophisticated threat actor or a human. If your data isn't protected, it doesn't matter. So, but to focus on the malicious side of the threat landscape of data, or to data, some of the most significant threat actors today are originating from China or Russia. But to my earlier point, if we do a better job of allowing data to protect itself, rather than solely focusing on securing the network system and applications, we also enable our data to protect itself. So the risk of data loss and the impact from these threats significantly decreases.
Interesting. Okay. For the sake of time, I had a few questions around this. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next one. But if anyone does have questions about these threat actors and where they're specifically focused, that's something we can certainly speak to in much more detail. So with that, moving on to my final question for you, TJ, I'm just wondering, in your expert opinion, what would you recommend to help enable the business in reducing the attack surface that we've been discussing today?
Yeah, so my point to all of this is that all the security controls, best practices, and protection strategies we've discussed today, well, they definitely need to continue. The bad guys are never going to go to sleep. As we found recently with the increase of cyber attacks during COVID-19, where the bad guys are continuing to hit organization when they are most vulnerable. So the bad guys are typically opportunists, period. They do not care if we're in a global pandemic where they can exploit a misconfiguration caused by an organization, having to react to a new remote workforce, or if they find a hole in your defense-in-depth controls, they will exploit it when given the opportunity. They will always be at your front door. This is not meant to scare anyone. This is really, the unfortunate reality that we live in today. So the issue is that today, in order to enable business, the front door to our data is everywhere throughout a technology supply chain. So there's a very good reason why, like cyber incident response and security operations, they need to work around the clock to protect the company crown jewels. They need to review logging from multiple data sources. They need to ensure security updates are installed on systems. They should restrict remote administration tools like remote desktop. They need to isolate systems that are infected with the latest malware. They should influence regular backups of data. And they should be a champion within the organization to basically promote security best practices. They need to continue to do all of this so that the bad guys can't exploit an avenue into your infrastructure. Security professionals will need to continue to work around the clock investigating data breaches to protect your crown jewels until we can enable our data to protect itself. This is the reality in most companies, and even the best security teams are defeated and our crown jewels are stolen, compromised, or held hostage. So I just feel like we need to help the security teams better protect data by allowing the data to protect itself, because the other reality that we've talked about today is that our data is not always staying inside the company infrastructure. It needs to travel everywhere inside a supply chain where you typically have less or no control. So my comment earlier about China as a threat actor, a group called APT41 knew or knows this concept very well. They knew that if they were able to infiltrate a managed secure service provider, where a lot of companies do not have control or have less control over data protection, they could take advantage of this opportunity and leverage an avenue back into multiple organizations. So for organizations where data is most valued, or it's your most valued asset, in order to reduce your attack surface from threats to your data, we need to shift and get an upper hand against the bad guy or accidental insider by having our data protect itself.
Great, thank you, TJ. With that, it is the bottom of the hour. We do have a little bit more content to go through, but if anyone needs to jump for other meetings, that's perfectly fine, and we just want to thank you for joining today. But for everyone else, just to that point, I wanted to go over a few things. Here I've outlined some critical components that we've found that most organizations are lacking. And these are tangible things that you can be working on today to keep your data better protected everywhere, and not just focusing on keeping data contained and protecting that only. because as we've been saying this whole time, your data still needs to travel for business. Remember, the key takeaway from this session is that your security needs to travel with your data. Your protection should not just end at your traditional network perimeter. And that all pretty much comes down to having a strong data security strategy. So here are a few examples of questions that I'd like everyone listening to ask for themselves. First, do you have a data classification program? So not only defined and implemented, but actually enforced, because you can't really be expecting your users to be handling data appropriately if it's not labeled and your expectations around that aren't clearly defined. And in terms of response, if today you were to experience a data breach, or really any security incident for that matter, how would you actually respond? Do you have plans in place that everyone is comfortable and familiar with? And who would be communicating with who, both internally and publicly? And who would be making critical decisions? There's a lot that goes into a response process, so this is something that ideally you document and test before an incident occurs. And do you have a strong security policy program that reflects your current risk appetite? Are users trained on them? Are these updated? And how are these enforced? That being part of the most critical aspect of this, actually enforcing your policies. And all of these components are essential for alignment with various regulations, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. So these do need to become prioritized if they're not already. Honestly, I could probably do a webinar on each of these topics, but for now, we do just want to bring these action items to the top of your mind. These lay the groundwork for strong data protection, allowing for things like better supply chain management and threat protection. But from there, your strategy does need to go beyond just process. In terms of technology, obviously we've been discussing self-protecting data today. So as you're considering how to enable your business and mature and modernize your security strategy and programs, do you have plans in place to actually implement data-centric security controls to enable your data to protect itself? If not, then how exactly would you address today's most critical recommendation, which is to keep your security traveling with your data wherever it goes? Because this is where solutions like DLP and VPN are lacking. And this is the gap that we're trying to focus on here at Keyavi. And we've discovered and created a unique solution to this ubiquitous problem. So we're happy to talk more about our technology in a follow-up. We don't want to take away from today's messaging. So feel free to reach out if you are interested, and we can certainly help with all of these pieces to the puzzle. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Like I said, please submit any in the Q&A field here. If we don't have a chance to answer your question, or if you're just interested in more information, please email us at info@keyavidata.com. Just going to open up the questions here. Okay, so someone mentions, how does this differ from DRM, so data rights management? TJ, do you want to field that one?
Sure. So basically, DRM provides no inherent protection to the data itself. It's limited functionality is only provided through the specific DRM platform. But as I mentioned today, and Celine has talked about, once it goes out of that platform, which it will, data needs to travel everywhere in order to enable business. So with DRM, security itself is not infused in the data. It's only provided by the platform, and it's not infused in all data files or data types. And no matter where it goes, it's not embedded into the data to be able to make those secure decisions.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, we have a few more coming in. So if I don't have a data classification program, is it still worth having self-protecting data?
So data classification will just categorize how sensitive your data is. There's no protection against it. So if you are concerned that the data classification policy, which is not enforceable, if you're concerned that your data is actually going to get compromised when that policy or classification is violated, yes, you still need to protect data, or at least implement a control to protect data.
Mm-hmm. And I just do want to mention there, data classification, that is something we certainly help through our professional services. So that's something we can help enforce and get implemented with you along the way so that you can actually use that process throughout with self-protecting data. So another question that's come in, can Keyavi protect against screen capture of data?
Yeah, so we can show you our technology. We do have the ability to protect against that in our infrastructure. So it's easier to show you the way that we're able to do that. But yeah, we do have a solution around being able to obfuscate a screen.
Great, yes. And that's something we do have product demos regularly. So if you're interested in that, we can show all of that. Although, to be honest, that one's a bit hard to show on a product demo since we can't show what we're not being able to show with a screen capture.
It's difficult because it literally blinks. So it's almost like you can't see the tech and how it does that. So, but anyway, it's difficult to talk to. We could kind of show that.
Okay, one last question here. Does every receiver of Keyavi protected data you share have to be a paid subscriber, or can you send data to people who don't have a Keyavi license?
So we have a read-only client that you could use to share with receivers that need to securely receive data. So we have a read-only client that allows for that.
Great. Okay, I believe that covers all of the questions I'm seeing here. Like I said, if anything is not covered or you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. The contact info is on the screen there. And with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us today. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with this material. Like I said, reach out if you have any additional questions or comments. We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.